In this step, we want to get rid of the hard-coded create dialog that we inserted in the previous step, the one that we have right here in our code. And we want to not only get rid of it, but we want to replace it with something that's actually relevant to the application, so that it actually understands how to ask us what we want to create. So to do that, scroll down and you're going to look for your index.js file. And this file is essentially the root of what gets built. So when Webpack runs and builds the application, this is the beginning of the application. So you can think of this as when the code gets mounted to the browser, this is the file that actually gets executed. And so it does a couple things. At the top, it's going to pull in lore. And then here it exposes lore globally. So this is why you can access lore in the console. And then this last thing it does is it calls lore.summon. And this step basically builds the application and mounts it to the browser. And there's the section here called hooks. And all of these hooks that you see, these are all of the functionality that gets exposed on lore. So this helps a little bit if we go over to the home page for lore. So if you look at the GitHub homepage, there's a folder called packages. And if you click on that, you'll see that there are a lot of different packages in here. And basically this is the collection of all the functionality that exists in lore. These are all different NPM packages. So the lore code base itself is a mono repo, and lore is largely a big plugin engine. So a lot of these plugins for lore generate model. This is a plugin for the CLI that we just have used previously, or lore generate new. This is a plugin that knows how to actually create a new application. But the ones we're interested in right now are these ones down here for lore hook. And these are all of the different pieces of functionality that exist for lore. So this lore hook dialog, this is the one we just used. That's a plugin that knows how to mount a component to that dialog element. And so what we're interested in for this step is this hook called lore hook dialogs bootstrap. And so what we want to do is we want to include that in the application. And so we're going to end up requiring it right here. I'm just going to leave these alphabetically. And I'm going to say lore hook dialogs, and it's called bootstrap. And we don't actually have this right now. So if we look at our package.json, it is not actually included as one of the defaults because there's a lot of applications that aren't going to be using bootstrap. So we need to install that. So I'm going to npm install lore hook dialogs, and I'm going to save that as an actual dependency. We'll give it a minute to finish installing. All right, and there it shows up in our application. So we're going to flip back to index, and I'm going to call this dialogs. And so we have it included. So now when the application loads, it's going to grab this hook and it's going to install it into the framework, and it's going to provide us access to that functionality. And we're going to be accessing it from dialogs. To use this hook, we're going to go back to our create button. And what we want to do, instead of returning this component here, we're actually going to return something generated by that hook. So now we can say lore.dialogs, since that's where we wanted the hook to be mounted. And then I'm going to tap into our models. So we want to create a model, in this case, for our tweet. And we want to create a create dialog. That's the experience that we want to show. And in this case, we're going to pass it an object, and we need to give it one argument. And that's going to be called onSubmit. And onSubmit is the function. When we complete the dialog, we are going to have a chance to do something with the data. So we're going to create an onSubmit called create tweet. And I'm going to create that just above here. So I'm going to say function create tweet. And I'm just going to console log. And this create tweet is actually going to get some parameters. So I'm just going to console log the parameters. And we're going to save that. All right, so now let's flip over to our application. And we're going to refresh the page. And we're going to click our button again. And notice that we still have a dialog that got launched, but now it says create tweet. And we have our cancel and create button. So it's still a dialog. And all we did was we replaced our hard-coded create dialog with this auto-generated dialogue that's using conventions. So what we need to do now is we need to fill in this middle part, right? A dialogue's not very useful if we can't actually enter the text for our tweet. So to finish creating that experience, we need to go back to our code. And this hook, right, the reason we can say dialogs.tweet is because it's tapping into the models. It's looking at our models and saying that it's assuming that we're going to want to create some dialogues for each of those models for create and update and delete. So to tell it what fields we want it to let us create, we need to go back into our model. And we're going to open up our tweet. And at the top here, there is a attributes, right? We can set some attributes. And in this case, the attributes are meant to be the fields of this model, right? So what's the content for the model that we're going to be using? And in this case, we have one. So I'm going to call this text. And I'm calling it that because if we take a look at our API and we look at our tweets, that is the actual field that is being sent from the server. And so that's the field that we want to send back to the server. So that is one of the attributes on this model. So I first need to set the type, and I'm setting that to text. And then I have some options here for display name and placeholder. And we'll see what those do in just a minute. So with that added, if we refresh the application and we click on the create dialog, it's now looked at those attributes we specified for the model and created content that's appropriate for that. And so we have our display name here for message, and it's mapped that to the label of this field. And the placeholder text for what's happening has been mapped to the text field for this input. So let's give it some text, right? So this is super easy to create Bootstrap dialogues. I'm going to click create. And so that automatically closes the dialog. And if we open up the developer tools, we can see that it actually logged our message. And so the parameters, go back to the code, the params in this onSubmit callback that are being passed in that we're logging are the attribute that we asked the dialog to create for us, right? So now we have exactly the data that we would want to send to the server. So in the next step, we're going to take these params and we're actually going to send them to the server to complete this create experience.